So let's first of all figure out what we're going to do as far as making this look like a building. And I think the easiest thing to do is really to extrude it. So we can take a rectangle and extrude it. So I'm going to look for something that will allow me to do that. So I'm actually under curves, curve, and then I'm going to extrude, but not extrude the line. I want to extrude it as a solid. And I just want to extrude it by a distance. So I'm going to go ahead and select extrude as a solid for a distance. And if I plug the rectangle, which is a curve, into this curve, we get a solid extrusion, but it's only 1 foot deep. So I want to make the floors. I'm going to create a code block. It's going to allow me to put a couple of different numbers in, and we're not going to use them all in the other number right away. But let me just zoom in here if I can. And I'm going to put 2 numbers in. 12 is what I'm going to call the foot, the floor height. So it'd be, from ceiling to floor, 12 feet. And then I'm going to space the floors 15 feet apart. And the reason I'm giving that little 3-foot gap is so that you can visualize in the generative design program the number of stories. Otherwise, it would all look like it was one just large extrusion. It would be very difficult to kind of discern how many floors were visually represented there. So I think that just enhances the kind of presentation it'll be. So if I go ahead now and plug in the distance, I now have a floor that's 12 feet high. And when I start building the other ones, I'm going to separate them by that 15. One thing I'd like to do right away, though, is give it a color. So what I've done over here is I took the original color that we had, the geometry by color and these selectors, and I've grouped those. And you group those by selecting them and then right-clicking and then create a group. And I'm going to call this right now. I'm going to just label this one property line color. And we'll go ahead and I'm going to copy this. Oops. Copy and paste it. We'll be able to use that then to color our building. And the reason I want to color the building right away is when we start to build the context buildings inside of Revit, they're going to all be gray. And so we want them to be able to stand out. So I'm going to go ahead and then plug that geometry in. We're not seeing a difference because the gray of the original one is still showing. So I turn the preview off for that. Now we have a red building. We don't want red. Let's say we want a green one. So I'll just plug in the slider for green. And now we have our green building. Now the next thing we do is relatively complicated. I discuss a little bit of math involved with it. But what we want to do is make multiple floors to a target of how much our gross square footage of our building wants to be. So the idea here is the developer wants to build, let's say, 25,000 or 250,000 square feet. And he wants to know whether it's better to build up, wider, what the width of the building would be in order to afford the best views from any of the choices of placing the building on the site. So we need a way of kind of doing those kind of calculations. So I'm going to start out with using a code block as a place to start thinking about that. So I'm going to put in code block again. And this is really quite a powerful tool. So if I start to enter things like I want to have target square footage, and I'm going to type that all as one word so it looks like it's just a variable. And I want to separate it. I'm at square footage, excuse me. Hold on, let me fix that. So the target square footage, and then we have the idea of the building width. These are all inputs. And then we're going to do a little bit of math. So we want to figure out what the floor square footage is. And the easiest way to do that is just to multiply the width of the building, right? So we're going to do, let's say floor, and I think I say square feet, all right, is equal to and I'm just going to copy up here. Let me just zoom in if I can on the right screen here. I'm going to just grab the building square feet width, which is an input variable now, copy. And I'll do paste, and then I'm going to do plus, and then I'm going to paste it again. And actually, I don't want that to be, I want that not to be adding them, I want them to be multiplied. That's how I get square footage, excuse that. Let me find my times sign, oops. All right, and so now we have the idea of square footage. And then the last thing is now that we know what our overall square footage is per floor, that, that's this is floor square footage. Let me just put the R in here. Sorry, typo. Okay, so now the total square footage divided by that target square footage, or should I say it the other way around? The target square footage divided by how much square footage is on each floor will give us the number of stories. Oops. And I know I didn't say that very well. So we've got number of stories being what our overall gross square footage of our building is, divided by how much is on any individual floor. So as the building gets smaller, as the square footage per floor gets smaller, when we want to keep the same target square footage, we're going to end up with more stories to the building. And so we need to actually, so I just clicked off of that code block. And what really happens very nice now is we have an input for the building width and the target square footage, and we'll get our two outputs for floor square footage and number of stories, even though we really only need the number of stories for our calculation. So let's create just a number, I guess, for square footage. Sorry, I lost that. And we'll call this, and right away I'll rename it. And I'm not exactly sure. I want to just check my notes here to see what I put in for the target, just so our numbers don't get too wild. I put in 2025, 250,000, 250, no, I'll just type it. 25000, 25,000. So that's our target square footage. And I'll pull this all the way off way over to the beginning of our definition. And we have our building width here, and I'm going to grab that and drag that all the way over again to here, to our input of our building width. And now we're going to get an output from this. And this should be, in this case, it's like 15 stories or 16 stories. So what I want to do now, I have a problem, is that we can't make 15.625 stories. We need to come to a solid integer value. So we're making, we're, like I say, it's a target square footage. It's not going to be perfect because we can't make that happen with the variables that we have. But there is this idea of being able to round that number down within the computer. And I have to look for what that definition is. It's called it's called a floor. So let me get on my right screen. And so the idea here is if you roll over it, it'll say, hopefully, it will return the first integer smaller than the number. So I'm going to take in the number of stories now, which is 15 something, and the output should be a solid 15. So now I have a 15-story building. So it'll automatically round that to a solid integer value. So we're really now all set to start. What I'm going to do next is to replicate the building vertically to create those stories.